Hello everybody, welcome back to the Creator Shelf, and you are joining me on a bright and beautiful day in Belgium. So yes, we crossed into autumn and the weather got better. But leaving that irony aside, today we're going to be looking at the Everyday Witch Tarot. It's a tarot deck that was produced by Deborah Blake. Art is by Elizabeth Alba. And I just checked, it was created in 2017. So it wasn't that long ago. For some reason, I thought this deck was from like 2013 or 2014, but no, it's a lot more recent. It's 2017. So this is an edition that I picked up last year, and it's been sitting on my shelf. And then in the month of September, that was my deep dive. So so let me just get on with like how I found it. So this is a Llewellyn box deck. It's one of these really large box decks that we get. Just let me get the cards out. So I think all of you by now know these like large decks that Llewellyn makes with the magnetic closure. So it's pretty chunky and big, and it comes with its own guidebook. These are the back of the cards, and as you can see, those are the backs. Now some people don't really love the backs. I love them. I really like them. I wouldn't cover them, but I know that some people said, oh, not for me, it's a bit cartoonish. But the whole deck, I think it fits the aesthetic of the deck. So it is Llewellyn cardstock. It's not everybody's favorite, but I really like it. I'm actually really grown to really like Llewellyn cardstock. It's not too thick. The cards aren't huge, so for me with small hands, it's just they're so much easier to handle. And what I really like is the fact that Llewellyn does their colors and their printing superbly. So the whole card just pops. That's what I want to say. It pops, and just they're so bright and easy to get to. So this is a deck that I picked up Christmas last year. It was a Christmas present for myself, and I bought it, and I was really glad I got it. And then I kind of like just didn't touch it. So yeah, that says something. It just stayed in its box, and it stayed wrapped in its box, which is even worse. So I didn't even open the whole thing. And I don't think that's got anything to do with the deck. I think it was just where my mind was at. It was just really not in a very good place. And for some reason, I felt like if I use the deck and I'm not really in a good place, I'm really in a bad mood, it's almost like I'm not sure if I would have done the deck justice, if that makes sense. And at the time, I just needed to go back to using decks that I was already very familiar with, because yeah, it was just December and January this year were really, well, last year and this year were really difficult. So that was the time when I wasn't sure about then looking at a new tarot deck and trying to review it and get a hold on it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And so I decided to just leave it. And it didn't call me, and that was fine. So speed it up, and we came into the summer this year, and for some reason I just thought this is like a back to school deck for me. I don't know how else to put it, but September is like a back to school vibe, and I decided to make it my like deep dive for September. So as you all know, I'm part of the Connect with Your Deck Challenge community, which you can easily find on Facebook. And what it gives me a bit of a kick up the bum, let's put it that way, for me to actually really use a tarot deck daily, because sometimes I just won't. And I try to answer the question, pull one or two cards. Sometimes the cards are pertinent to the question. Sometimes the cards are just reading whatever's going on in my life, and they're just very good. So in September, this was the deck that I used, and I love that card. And it has just been a real journey. Now, the first thing that struck me about this deck, because I've got several things to say, and I'm going to first talk about the things that I like about the deck, and then I'm going to talk about the things that I think could have been different. Maybe in the future, another deck like this could take it into account. So that's how I'm going to put it. So first and foremost, this deck was just amazing because it reminds me of these books I used to read in the 1980s. So now you can tell my age. But in the 1980s, we had these books called The Worst Witch. And it's a story about Mildred Hubble, I think it is. I can't remember now her name. Yeah, and she's got a friend called Maud, and she goes to school, and Mildred is just basically classically just like really, really clumsy, and she makes a mess out of everything, and yet she just happens to always save the school. That's the kind of thing. And this is well before the Harry Potter times, and I like Harry Potter too, by the way. But yeah, The Worst Witch was like a book that I really like to read, and then there's The Worst Witch Strikes Back, and there's like a series of like 3 books, and then furthermore were made, but the initial 3 were the ones that I just kept reading over and over again when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And the reason why I liked those books so much were they just gave me like, storytelling, and they gave me a portal to imagine. And I remember being like 8 and looking out of my window and kind of like trying to imagine like, these witches at Halloween going across the sky. I would have those kind of thoughts like, am I going to see a witch? Am I going to see something special, something spooky? And I'm just like, I was one of those little kids that just really loved stuff like that. And like the idea of magic and that other world, basically, crossing into the spirit world. So, I also read a lot of like books about King Arthur, and especially where I was growing up and where I'm born, it was just really pertinent, especially in Northern England, witchcraft is really, really something that I think a lot of us just, if we feel it in our bones in the north of England. And some of you might know, we had the first witch trials before they actually went over to the US in the 17th century. So it's really kind of like a deck that evokes those memories of being young, and it's just been a really good deck in that sense. It's the other thing that I want to say, and I just want to make sure I go through all the points, is that this deck for me really, really filled a hole in kind of like, so I'm still talking about early childhood, but I'm talking now about those early puberty years, when we're like about 10, 11, 12. And this was a deck that really kind of like brought me, that I think has been really good for me in terms of, those are the years where I think for a lot of us, we struggle with like trying to understand, we're still a child, or I just want to say, still a child, but there's an adultness that I'm starting to have a really strong awareness of, especially when we go through like a lot of changes, not just physically, but also emotionally and mentally, and trying to look at the world around us. And that's when we really start to pick up things like the school that we go to, and then when we go into like what we call in the UK secondary school, or I think in the US you call it high school, where we go into high school, and it's a real coming of age, I think, at that moment. And it kind of like was a period where I really felt lonely, and this deck, I think for me, has been really instrumental, because it's kind of like the best friend that wasn't there at that time, or I just didn't have that feeling at that time. So this deck has just been really, really soothing. That's how I want to put it, soothing, and answers questions about things like, how can I get out of my own way? How can I let go of something? How can I embrace the positive? How can I have gratitude? All those questions that we still deal with today, but it's almost like it's reteaching me that from like an early childhood perspective. And I really, really thank it for that, actually. So if there was a category called the BFF, the best friend forever, I think this deck for me would really fall into that, and just really help answer a lot of questions. And the other thing I really love about this art is the fact that it's just very, very, it's very clear. And I think that's what I want to say about the deck and its art. It's a very clear, easy to understand deck. And I think a lot of people have pulled it out. It's a great beginner's deck. That's what I've heard again and again. And I agree, it is great. Not all of the symbols of Rider-Waite-Smith are there, and I do want to also raise that. Like, for example, today I was looking at the Empress card here, and I don't see her symbol anywhere. I don't see the cushion anywhere, and that's fine. this is the everyday witch perspective on the Empress. This is Deborah Blake's perspective on the Empress, and I want to embrace that. But I just want to say that it doesn't have all those symbols, and for somebody who really wants to make sure that they're learning all those symbols, I would still make sure that you have a copy of the classic RWS next to you, you know, if you're doing it as a learning. But this deck as a beginner's deck, I think it's just great. I would definitely recommend it for someone young and starting out on tarot. So yeah, it's been a deck that's just, you know, made me smile this month, and especially this month because I was going through a lot of looking at past memories, and I think that's why this deck just, it always feels like it was meant to be, that it sat on my shelf, and then as I did some work on certain periods of my life that have been quite challenging and difficult when I was young, this deck has been there for it. So I am really grateful for that. I'm just checking my notes to see if there's anything else that I have kind of like missed off. I think this is a deck that I would really recommend. I would really recommend to have also when reading for others, but, and this is, sorry, this is where it's a bit of a but, I'm not sure if it would really be great for everyone. And I think these are some of the drawbacks that I want to point out. One, the deck does lack diversity, and it kind of like started to become very clear as I worked through the deck and near towards the end of the month that it would have really benefited from having more body diversity, skin tones, just that's one aspect. And the other aspect that was really actually very strong for me was that it is quite feminine, and a part of me was thinking, is there a masculine deck like this? Because I think that would really help as well, or one where there's, I mean, you know, there's a masculine energy every now and then, but predominantly it is very feminine. I say that and then I pull out two cards where, yeah, we've got knights and pages obviously, but I think predominantly is very feminine, and sometimes I wish there was more of a bit of a balance in this deck, because the masculine energy is present in a feminine life, you know, so that's where I'm a bit like, And the other drawback that I think that this deck has is that it is very young, and I think sometimes if I was reading for someone who's in their 50s or 60s, and I've had querents who are in that age category, and I will read for any age category, of course, not minors, but you know, 18 and onwards. I think that this deck really might not just be for them, because it might just feel like, you know, they're not going to connect to it, and I think that's something that I want to be careful of. But you know, I've paused on this card because this card, I love the Tower. I love the Tower in this deck, and I like the fact that in the deck the witch has some very interesting expressions. I mean, here she looks like she's brought down that tower actually, and it's a bit of kind of like, sometimes things have to change, and sometimes this is how the change happens. There's a destruction, things fall apart, and you know, there's a wreck basically. And I'm looking at this card because I'm looking at the little cat in the side, and the cat just also looks a bit scared, and it's cowering, and I think this is where the deck shines actually, because of his expression. Like, you know, I could look at that card and just pull out so many things from it. So yeah, I really like the deck because of the fact that it has been done in a very, now this card I like, sorry, I just want to say, because there is an age range in it, and I appreciate that. There's more of an age range. I love the fun in this deck with the fishes and the cats, and you know, that whole image you can see, and with the butterflies is very clear. It's almost like everything's going upwards, and that's why I like this deck so much, because it kind of like brings me along. You know, this is the picnic on the beach. I mean, this is where everything comes together. I mean, what more can you want? You know, you're on the beach, you're relaxing, the sun is out, there's a cool breeze, you know, you can soak your feet and cool them down. There's a cocktail on the side, the cat's happy, there's like food, there's a place to stay. I mean, yeah, I just love this deck. So yeah, I've talked a little bit about the drawbacks, but I think mostly if there was like a scoring, I don't really like scoring decks too much, but if there was a scoring, I mean, this would definitely be really high in its scoring because it is just so emotive, and I just like the fact that the witch has this cat companion in every card, and I just, yeah, I think it really just like sings to my heart in that sense. So I know this is a very popular deck, and I know there's been loads of reviews, so I'm just adding my own take on it. But I really believe from these reviews, I think this is like now my fifth or sixth like deep dive of the month, that it is really worth sitting with a deck throughout a month and just pulling cards from it every day, because it really helps me to get to know the deck, you know. And I sometimes pull 2 or 3 cards. I won't just pull one card per day. I'll pull a few just to see how they read together. And this card really brings some very, very clear messages. That's what I want to say as well. I've very rarely had it where I've pulled 3 cards and thought, huh? I don't understand you. You know, this is a deck where I've had like stalker cards where throughout the week one of the cards will always be the same, or you know, it's just a card that just it's a deck that really kind of like clearly conveys a message. I have to go back to this card specifically because this reminds me of The Worst Witch, my books that I read in the 80s. This reminds me of Mildred Hubble, and especially because there's an image like that was originally on the books, with a witch, you know, and the moon in the background, and I just yeah, this deck just really, like, if I'd had this when I was 8 or 9 years old, I wouldn't have understood tarot. I wouldn't have understood how to do readings and stuff like that. But this deck would have been really, I think, something that I would have just probably turned over again and again and again addictively, and looked at stuff, and it would have been my friend, you know, because that's what I was doing with the books. I was just rereading them again and again because that was my world basically. And you know, and this is kind of like the deck that if it had been there at that time, I'm pretty sure I would have loved it. So yeah, so if you're interested in the Everyday Witch Tarot, of course, as you all know, it's mass market, available on Amazon and Book Depository. I think it retails right now around €30, but it's worth the investment. And I think the mini is around 12 or 15 euros. So it's just so worth the investment, I think. I would recommend giving it a try, even if you don't want to use it in the future and you want to pass it along. I'm sure it would also be something like, you know, if you pass it along, that gift to a new tarot reader would also, I think, be well appreciated. But it's a deck that, like, I think I'm going to keep in my arsenal forever. I'm definitely, I think, going to buy the mini as well because it's just so good to have with me. And yeah, that's the way I sum it up. This is my best friend, and thank you for watching this week.